Hi, Misha here, and last time we talked about Russia's Sukhoi SU-27 and the SU-27SM, and even a little bit about the SU-33. Those are all Generation 1 Sukhois. Today we're going to talk about Generation 2, first known as the SU-27M, now known as the SU-35S or SU-35E if we're talking export. These are considered 4.5 generation jet fighters, or as Russia insists, 4++. They have a reduced radar cross signature. They have thrust vectoring Saturn engines. They can carry up to 8,000 kilograms on 12 stations of both air-to-air, air-to-ground, and even air-to-sea ordnance. And they are quite very impressive, all things considered. So much so that it's kind of caused Russia to reverse course a bit on the PAC-FA, reducing their orders to just a few dozen instead of hundreds as they originally intended. So what was so good about it? What do we have here? And yeah, so we have two models from Hobby Master, 172 scale diecast. This one's an earlier one and kind of the original paint scheme used around 2013-14, and it's set up in at least mine right now, it's set up in kind of a multi-role with air-to-air and air-to-surface munitions. And this one over here is a newer 2018-2019 Syrian war scheme, and I have it set up in just a air-to-air configuration, complete with the nozzles vectored in the back a bit, which is something you can do with the Hobby Master. So yeah, with that, we'll look at this second generation of air superiority multi-role fighter from Sukhoi. The SU-35S, the Flanker E or Super Flanker. And like the rest of these, this had a very long development cycle, but it was a very ambitious aircraft, and Sukhoi did a very good job of keeping it modern and up to date. And really this goes all the way back to 1982. As I said at the beginning, that was when the really design phase was over, and it was over to advanced testing and manufacturing for the original SU-27 Flanker B. Well, Sukhoi was looking, what's going to be our next thing? And they wanted to make a true multi-role aircraft. The 27 could drop bombs, launch rockets, but its radar originally didn't really have ability to target anything on the ground. So they wanted to make something that could do that. They wanted to be able to operate as a super maneuverable fighter. The SU was already very maneuverable, but they wanted to improve that. They wanted something they could still operate as an interceptor, and also as a true strike fighter like their SU-24. Well, in 1983, they were kind of getting ideas together, and the Soviet government said, base your next concept on the SU-27. So that's what they did. They progressed forward, and of course they were still working on other designs like the 27K and the 27UB two-seater, which would evolve into the SU-30. But, it would take time. And the original, as it would be known, SU-27M for multi-role or modernized, had a lot of interesting features. It had wet tail wings here, tail horizontals for more fuel. It had really tall stabilizers. It had canards, much like you saw in the 33K. It had an advanced cockpit. It had an advanced jamming system. It had self-defense radar located in the Stinger. They always found interesting things to put in those throughout the model. It had uprated engines, and of course it could carry ground. And the first prototype was known as the T10M1, and it was an update of an earlier prototype. It was developed in 1987 and first flew in 1988. But really, it wasn't close to being a full 27M. It was actually little more than a SU-27P, which was the interceptor variant for the PVO, fitted with a glass cockpit, a more modern cockpit, and an aerial refueling system, and a handful of other updates. Nevertheless, it was a step in the direction. And the second prototype, yet again another reworked T10, flew in 1989. And it wouldn't be until 1992, April, that the first all-new production machine took to the skies and had more of the 27M features. But of course, in the interim, the Soviet Union collapsed, which kind of left the project in limbo. They would actually get to the point where they built about 3 true production, or at least full production models, and then they had 11 prototypes or pre-productions. So they built a few, and Sukhoi would use these as tech demo planes. They would actually show them off for the first time to the world at the Farnborough show in 1992 in England. And they would give 3 over to the VVS for weapons testing in 1996. And originally, they were planning to introduce the 27M as a complement, not really a replacement for the SU-27. And they were suggesting it would be accepted into service around 1995, entering into production by 1996. At least the optimists at Sukhoi were saying this. Others in there pointed out that that really wasn't realistic with the technology they were working with, and the just limited budget for, well, everyone in Russia during the Yeltsin era. Yet it must be said that Sukhoi ended up with more contracts and more favor than MiG at this time. And they did try offering this to many nations for export. Brazil comes to mind, India, China. And to make it a little more marketable and seem a little newer, they changed the name to the SU-35. It is a marketing thing, same thing they did with the 33. But actually, in 1995, there was an interesting variant that would have a lasting influence on this whole series. In 1995, Sukhoi, who was always trying to drum up business and go for the newest technology, they had a good marketing department, I'll give them that. They fitted one of the prototypes, the T10M11, with an alternative version of the AL-31F engine with thrust vectoring. Now, it wasn't truly 3D. It was in, one plane only, two-dimensional, but it gave better agility and so on and so forth. They would first fly this in April of 1996, and again show it off at Farnborough that September. And they named it the SU-37. And by all accounts, it was an impressive aircraft in flight. It had some very good maneuverability, could do some neat tricks, and it got noticed. But the truth is, it was just a tech demo. In fact, the engine wasn't even meant for sustained use. They had a very short service life. So after showing off the so-called SU-37 a bit, Sukhoi would finally take it back in when the engines were worn out, put more conventional engines in, and continue using it as a test bed. So the SU-37 was very brief, but its thrust vectoring would be carried forward. Now, all the work for the 27M, the 35, the 37, it wasn't forgotten. In 2002, like I said, the SU-27SM upgrade with the new glass cockpit and all that would be first flown, and it would be accepted by the VVS, later VKS. And that was shown off in August of 2003. Then Sukhoi thought, well, we'll take all this stuff and combine it into a new aircraft model. The prototype was known as the T-10MB, and the official service name would be SU-35S. And they would begin construction, and the prototype would be complete in 2007, and it would take to the skies in February of 2008, just shy of 20 years after the first prototype of this model variant flew. But they did get quite a bang for their buck, frankly. Let's switch away from the earlier one with the earlier paint scheme to the newer one from Hobbymaster with the Syrian War scheme. The models are the same variant, and we'll compare it with the SU-27SM because the 35 does everything the 27SM does, but better and more naturally from the factory. It is just under 73 feet long, with a wingspan of just over 50 feet. And it has a maximum speed at altitude of over 2.2 Mach, and a max speed at sea level of over 1.1 Mach. And it is capable of supercruise. It has the 30mm cannon with 150 rounds. It has 12 weapon stations, 12 pylons, and it can carry up to 8,000 kilograms, so 17,600 pounds, give or take. It has an advanced glass cockpit, all the modern avionics, and it has a new Saturn AL41F engine with the thrust vectoring, and I plugged in the ones that can move on this one. They don't, move a whole lot on the real aircraft, but the nozzles can orientate for tight maneuvering. They also reworked the airframe quite a bit. They slimmed down this hump behind the cockpit. They also shrunk the verticals a little bit, and they shrunk this stabilizer, this stinger in the back. And of course we get rid of the old Pt.8 tube in the front. And that's because this has some notion towards stealthiness. It's not a stealth aircraft, but they did what they could to minimize the radar signature. Russia, most places consider this a Generation 4.5 aircraft. Russia calls it a Generation 4++. It's in between. It's more than a MiG-29 or original F-15. And of course it carries pretty much anything. Whereas the 27SM was upgraded to fire the R-77 and other laser-guided munitions. This came out of the factory, able to work with them, as well as even more. Air to ground, even air to ocean, anti-shipping missiles. It also has some reconnaissance capability. You know the deal, and that's hobo. And of course, it can carry quite a wide range. I have this one set up in an air-to-air roll with R-73s, R-77s, and some good old R-27s down below. Whereas this one over here is set up more in a multi-roll and slightly older style loadout. Sukhoi originally dreamt up and marketed the SU-27M, later SU-35, for export. The model for export was known as the 35E. But of course, the first customer would actually be the Russian Air Force, and there would be a version for them known as the SU-35S. But of course, they would have international success. They pushed it in South America, Africa, and Asia, and they had the most success in Asia with Indonesia, China, and India to some extent. Being rather pleased with how the SU-27SMs were working out, in 2009, the Russian government placed an order with Sukhoi for 48 of the new planes. And delighted to have the order, they quickly worked on and produced the first full production aircraft. It was ready in October of 2010, and it would take its first flight the following spring. And from there, production would ramp up. By the end of 2012, the Russian VKS had 6 full production models, plus some prototypes dating back to the 90s for the earlier ones. And continuing on, throughout 2013, they would continue testing. At the end of that year, they would take delivery of 12 more, and at the beginning of 2014, 12 more would get delivered. To that end, they were accepted for service and would soon reach initial operational readiness. And in 2015, the first contract for 48 was complete. They would also get a contract from China for 24. Originally, Sukhoi estimated they would need to build about 200 of these for all users. Turns out they were pretty close on that number. In Indonesia would also become interested and purchase some. And in 2016, right as the Chinese order started to be delivered there, the Russian government decided, hey, we would like 50 more. That's because in January of that year, they deployed the first 4 into combat in and around Syria. This was in response to a Turkish aircraft shooting down a Russian aircraft that previous November. So the 4 SU-35Ss were sent there to provide escort duties, fly combat air patrol cap, and also for a ground attack strike as needed. And they did well. Now, some bugs in the avionics, electronics, computers were identified. In fact, this kind of early deployment to a true combat theater was good for the design. It let them work out the bugs. Sukhoi quickly patched them and fixed them up, so much so that it was declared fully operational in 2018, and more started to operate over Syria. In fact, between August and December of 2019, they would conduct many intercepts. First, on August 20, SU-35s would intercept a Turkish, I believe it was a Turkish F-16. And then just not even a week later, on August 26th, they would intercept an Israeli aircraft. And both times they were kind of denying passage and forced the combatant to turn back. And this would happen more and more throughout September. Turkey and Israel weren't able to carry out their plans, and the Sukhois proved to be quite a threatening adversary there. They had the newer R-77 air-to-air missiles. They could carry plenty of the older ones too. They even could carry the new R-40, and of course they could carry quite a few bombs and what have yous. So quite a bit of service And the Chinese seemed happy with them. And Sukhoi, they're not stupid. They realize that China will probably reverse engineer them, but, you know, hey, it was still a contract. In actually 2018, they passed a milestone of producing the 100th SU-35. And that might seem like a low number, but keep in mind these are big, modern, fourth generation jets, even maybe 4.5. You know, numbers aren't what they used to be for the old Soviet days. You know, things change. So they're doing well. There are orders ongoing. In fact, in 2020, quite pleased with how they performed in Syria. The VKS ordered 30 more. So they had 98 full production models in service, and soon they plan to up that to 128. Now, you know, there is the SU-57 also from Sukhoi. And one major reason that Russia has kind of scaled back its number of SU-57s it wants is because the SU-35, originally just kind of meant to be a stopgap or a final production type for the SU-27, has just worked out so damn well. It's truly a multi-role aircraft. It doesn't have a ginormous signature. It's quite fast. It's actually not only good as a ground striker, being able to carry a good amount of ordnance, its abilities in air-to-air combat are quite well. In 2008, the RAND Corporation actually did a study, and by their calculations, the SU-35, if it was in a fight with F-35s, it would have a 2.4 to 1 kill ratio in favor of the Sukhoi. In other words, for every Sukhoi SU-35S lost in combat, 2.4 F-35s would be lost. Of course, this is just a design study and whatnot. Needless to say, Lockheed was not amused and did not agree with these findings. But it does go to show you it is a truly modern aircraft, and unlike the SU-57, which is pretty expensive, the SU-35 is pretty economical. And it's kind of funny how far its roots go back, frankly. One more thing to point out, kind of recent news. On July 31st, one of these was lost in a training accident in Russia. The pilot ejected safely. The heat sensor, part of the climate control system, had a nebulous or error report giving a fraudulent temperature reading. He thought one of the engines had caught fire. So, he bailed out. Well, it was just a sensor in error. But of course, without a pilot, the aircraft wasn't going to go very far very fast. No, that's saved for Harriers. But, yeah, I wouldn't have wanted to be that pilot when the study came out. I have a feeling he did not have a good day when they realized that he let a perfectly good and new aircraft go to the ground for not the best reason ever. But so goes it. Aircraft are lost in training all the damn time. And that's really where we stand with the VKS Air Force, what they're flying these days. This is front line and an impressive aircraft. Although sometimes people will underestimate it because it seems like it's just a SU-27, but it's a lot more than that, frankly. With that, let's wrap things up. And there we have it. Well, to date, they have built right at 140 of these, making them more successful than several other previous designs, but also a pretty low production number for a Russian aircraft. The days of producing thousands or even tens of thousands like the MiG-15 and MiG-21 are over. This is more analogous to a Western aircraft in its size and capabilities and complexity. And it has certainly been battle-tested over the last half-decade. And these Hobbymaster models are pretty pretty neat. And you can kind of configure them with ordnance just to have some fun. At least that's what I do. Your mileage may vary. So what do you think? With that, well, next time we'll move on with some more Suhois. But for now, I think we both had enough. Appreciate you tuning in. This is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.